morning, evening, or night, wherever you are. Welcome to WHAM today. Take a deep breath, clear your mind, and let's drift through the whispers of today's world, one quiet thought at a time, as we wrap up Monday, 7th July, 2025. Let's see what stories are unfolding around us. United States trade policies continue to send ripples throughout global markets. The Trump administration is holding firm on tariffs, sending warnings to partner countries, although a July 9th deadline has been delayed. These potential tariffs, particularly the threat of a 25% levy on numerous countries, including BRICS members, are causing market volatility. Ongoing trade talks continue between the U.S. and the EU and South Korea, addressing issues like big tech regulations and agriculture, with the EU seeking a quick framework trade deal. These trade tensions are affecting us stock markets, with the Dow, S&P 500, and Nasdaq experiencing declines as investors react to tariff threats. The Dow, in particular, slid significantly. However, positive comments from Trump have spurred brief hopes for trade deal progress, leading to a temporary rebound in stock futures. The White House is also warning of potential blackouts as part of an initiative to support the coal industry. Furthermore, Eric Trump is scheduled to headline Bitcoin Asia 2025 in Hong Kong, discussing Bitcoin's potential and Asia's role in its adoption. Turning to Australia, the markets are heavily influenced by US trade policies and domestic economic factors. The Reserve Bank of Australia, RBA, unexpectedly held the policy rate, awaiting further inflation data to confirm its trajectory toward the 2.5% target. Australian bonds are attracting significant inflows from Japanese investors, reaching a two-year high, while Australian pension funds are shifting their investment focus away from the US. The country is also implementing a new mandatory merger control regime. In corporate news, Platinum and Loan Capital, two Australian asset managers, have agreed to merge. Qantas has reported a cybersecurity incident involving a data breach and subsequent contact from a cyber criminal. Australia is also exploring its potential in low-carbon fuels, estimating a $36 billion opportunity. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is scheduled to visit China, coinciding with Beijing's interest in reviewing trade deals amid US-China trade tensions. Across the South China Sea, Hong Kong's financial markets are especially sensitive to US trade policies, with stock prices rising on optimism surrounding potential trade deal sweeteners from the US, while conversely, Hong Kong stocks also experienced declines amid US trade uncertainty. The Standard Chartered forecasts potential weakness for the Hong Kong dollar due to liquidity and interest rate differentials, possibly trading near $87.85 per dollar. Eric Trump, son of President Donald Trump, is scheduled to headline Bitcoin Asia 2025 in Hong Kong, discussing Bitcoin's potential and Asia's role in its adoption. Meanwhile, Goldman Sachs anticipates that listed Chinese companies will distribute us $419 in dividends in 2025, a 10% increase from 2024. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese of Australia is scheduled to visit China, coinciding with Beijing's interest in reviewing trade deals amid US-China trade tensions. In South Korea, Samsung's profits have halved, attributed to US chip restrictions and delays in AI memory development. South Korea is also engaged in trade discussions with the US, focusing on areas such as big tech regulations and agriculture. A tanker is en route to South Korea, carrying Canada's first major shipment of liquefied natural gas from Kyiv, British Columbia. Speaking of Canada, the nation is diversifying its export markets, with a tanker carrying its first major shipment of liquefied natural gas from Kyiv, British Columbia, headed to South Korea, aiming to reduce reliance on the US. In Europe, European shares are on the rise, driven by gains in the tech and banking sectors, with a strong focus on US trade negotiations. The EU is actively seeking to finalize a framework trade deal with the US this week. On the global stage, oil prices are steady, with traders closely monitoring US tariff developments and attacks in the Red Sea. The US dollar is firming in response to the US tariff letters. Elsewhere, most Gulf markets are experiencing gains, influenced by progress in US trade deals. The TX, Toronto Stock Exchange, is also rising as investors await developments in US trade negotiations. Carmichael-R's quarterly sales dropped 11% after US exports halt and Jaguar wind down. Japan. Amid escalating trade tensions, President Trump threatened to impose tariffs on major Japanese exports, including cars, steel, and electronics, unless an agreement was reached with the U.S., triggering market reactions and diplomatic responses. Japan's Nikkei 225 index initially rose slightly, but later closed lower, reflecting caution ahead of the tariff deadline, mirroring broader market volatility. Stock market losses widened as details of the tariffs emerged. Trump informed Japan's leaders of the new tariff rates in letters, with Japan calling the tariff measures regrettable as officials scrambled to address the new deadline. Trump announced plans to impose tariffs of 25% on Japanese goods, along with new import taxes on a dozen other nations. Japan's early June exports saw a slight increase prior to the implementation of higher tariffs. Trade talks with the U.S. would continue in pursuit of a mutually beneficial deal, as Japan needs to reduce its reliance on US trade. Amid these developments, real wages in Japan fell for the fifth consecutive month in May, and wage data indicated that inflation could be significantly impacting incomes despite income increases. New listings on Japan's exchanges fell by 26.3% in the first half of the year. Separately, discussions advanced between the Gulf Cooperation Council, GCC, and Japan regarding a free trade agreement, with officials meeting in Tokyo. South Korea. Adding to the trade turbulence, President Trump also threatened to impose tariffs on major South Korean exports, mirroring the situation with Japan, including cars, steel, and electronics, unless an agreement was reached with the U.S., triggering market reactions and diplomatic responses. Trump informed South Korea's leaders of the new tariff rates in letters. South Korea faces 25% tariffs as Trump ramps up the trade war in letters to leaders. Seoul vowed to step up negotiations as Trump announced 25% tariffs on goods from Japan and South Korea. United States. At the center of the unfolding trade drama, President Trump threatened higher tariffs on Japan and South Korea, detailing new tariff rates for over a dozen countries, setting August tariff rates in a 14-letter spree. He announced plans to impose 25% tariffs on goods from Japan and South Korea, along with new import taxes on 12 other nations. The Dow Jones Industrial Average logged its worst day in 3 weeks, while the S&P 500 and Nasdaq snapped back-to-back gains following the announcement of tariffs. Taiwan Semiconductor is shifting focus to a $100 billion USA expansion instead of Japan. India's financial markets navigated a complex week, balancing tariff anxieties with proactive regulatory measures. The bond market remains stable, seemingly unaffected by increasing U.S. Treasury yields as traders looked for a strong domestic trigger. The Sensex and Nifty 50 fluctuated within a tight range due to ongoing uncertainty surrounding a potential trade agreement between India and the United States and the looming threat of new tariffs imposed by the U.S. despite a cautious start influenced by these trade concerns. The Nifty 50 managed to close the week with slight gain. Regulatory oversight. In India's derivatives market has tightened following actions against Jane Street, a trading firm that CBI has prohibited from trading due to alleged manipulation. This has led to more stringent rules for derivatives trading. Jane Street plans to contest the ban, arguing that its actions were merely standard arbitrage. SEBI also introduced a proxy advisory feature on its e-voting platform. In market news, Amphi's latest market cap reclassification has reshaped India's stock ranking. Several stock picks were offered by experts, including Chandan Taparia, who suggested buying Cesc, Delivery, and Cummins India, while Niles Jain covered Tata Consumer Products and Cummins India. Retail traders collectively lost 12 billion trading equity options. India is actively promoting Gift City as a hub for global capital through foreign currency listings, with the goal of creating a 300 billion economy by 2030. Cochin Shipyard has teamed up with HD Hyundai to increase its footprint in India's expanding shipbuilding sector. Tim Hortons has launched a matcha product line across India, tapping into the growing wellness trends among consumers. China faces mounting economic headwinds, navigating trade pressures and internal financial recalibrations. The 2025 trade war initiated by the United States is proving a defining challenge for Chinese leadership, as provincial officials seek avenues for growth amidst these shifts. China is being pushed to implement bolder steps to counter price wars, deflationary pressures, and lagging demand, as current interventions are seen as inadequate in addressing fundamental structural issues. Responding to these challenges, China is contemplating doubling the Southbound bond, connect to $139 billion, 1 trillion yuan, seeking to broaden avenues for investing in foreign bonds, and is allocating $111 billion for a strategic construction project. China stock exchanges are tightening their grip on programmed trading to safeguard smaller investors. The Shenzhen Exchange is encouraging domestic enterprises to expedite their IPO applications. Regulators are maintaining stringent oversight, tripling IPO spot checks amid a surge in filing. Despite these efforts, some smaller Chinese banks are canceling IPOs and delisting, citing profit concerns. Investment firms are competing to establish a strong foothold in China's equivalent of the Nasdaq. However, China and Hong Kong stocks have exhibited weakness as the U.S. tariff deadline approaches. China's position in critical minerals is under strain. Beijing's recent export controls on rare earths have spurred global efforts to diversify supply chains. The focus on China's strategic metal is highlighted as Shanghai Platinum Week commences. The impact of U.S. export restrictions on AI chips shipped to China has led to inventory write-downs for companies like Samsung, contributing to a 56% drop in their Q2 operating profit. The United States is applying pressure on China through trade policies and technological restrictions. The trade war initiated in 2025 is intensifying, prompting internal adjustments within China. Furthermore, U.S. export restrictions on AI chips destined for China have had a ripple effect, impacting companies like Samsung. Former Trump advisor Peter Navarro has publicly criticized Apple CEO Tim Cook for not relocating production out of China quickly enough, adding further pressure on the company. The question of whether Taiwan can decouple its economy from China, its largest trading partner, is under consideration. Ukraine is set to receive increased weapon shipments from the United States, as pledged by President Donald Trump. Further aiding Ukraine, a Swiss company is donating over $100,000 in energy equipment. Investment and energy cooperation are the focus of ongoing discussions between Ukraine and Saudi Arabia. Escalating the conflict with Russia, Ukraine claimed strikes on a Russian airbase and a chemical plant in the Moscow region, triggering retaliatory drone attacks on Kyiv. President Zelensky has also signed agreements to boost domestic drone production. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov warned that NATO bases in Ukraine would be a direct threat to Russia. Discussions are underway regarding the potential use of Moscow's assets to assist Ukraine and offset Russia's debt. United Kingdom. The UK's FTSE 100 saw a decline after an earlier rally faltered. Performance across UK stocks was mixed, with the pound weakening amid trade tensions that strengthened the dollar. There are concerns about a potential decline in UK business optimism. The Schroeder family faces a critical juncture for their financial dynasty. The UK government is making progress in approving the Sizewell C nuclear plant project. As part of its chemical weapons sanctions regime, the UK has sanctioned several Russian individuals and a research institute. London's position as a leading global financial centre is being questioned, with New York and Hong Kong emerging as potential rivals. Shine is reportedly seeking a London listing and has filed a confidential application for a Hong Kong IPO in an attempt to pressure the UK for approval. A new UK share platform, Pisces, is launching this summer, aiming to establish itself as the UK's new private stock market. The FTSE UK 50 Index Alpha Group International is under evaluation for a potential benchmark setting. Investors are exploring options for a £15,000 sterling investment to generate a £1,185 sterling second income. Halifax reported that average UK house prices remained unchanged month-on-month in June. In response to reports of misconduct concealment, the UK is moving to ban non-disclosure agreements, NDS. Russia. Amidst the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, a Putin minister was found dead, reportedly following failures related to the war. The Ukraine-Russia war involves reciprocal aerial attacks between Moscow and Kyiv, with Ukraine claiming to have struck a Russian airbase and a chemical plant in the Moscow region. Moscow responded by sending hundreds of drones into Kyiv. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has asserted that the establishment of NATO bases in Ukraine would pose an immediate threat to Russia's national security. Disruptions caused by drone attacks have led to the cancellation of nearly 300 flights at Russian airports. The UK government has imposed sanctions on Russian individuals and a research institute as part of its chemical weapons sanctions regime. United States. The United States, under the direction of President Donald Trump, has committed to providing Ukraine with additional weaponry. Saudi Arabia is engaging in discussions with Ukraine, focusing on potential investments and energy cooperation ventures. Switzerland is providing aid to Ukraine through a donation of energy equipment valued at over $100,000 from a Swiss company. Russia is in the news following the death of former Transport Minister Starovoyt, found dead in his car hours after his dismissal. Investigators suspect suicide by gunshot. President Putin has already appointed Starovoyt's deputy as the new transport minister. Economically, Russia is reducing support for small businesses and selling foreign currency reserves. The Merck stock market experienced fluctuating share prices across multiple sectors. Ukrainian drone attacks caused significant flight disruptions at Moscow and St. Petersburg airports. Furthermore, a Russian general was killed by a car bomb. Russian forces have reportedly gained a foothold in a new Ukrainian region. Gold billionaire Konstantin Strukov may face asset seizure. India's finance minister affirmed the resilient and steadfast partnership with Russia. Europe's markets are currently navigating a period of uncertainty, largely influenced by tariff-related announcements from the U.S. European banks, however, have reported robust first-half earnings, the strongest since 1997, though maintaining this level of profitability may prove difficult given the current climate of low interest rates. Investors are reacting positively to these strong earnings. European stocks have demonstrated mixed results, with tech and banking sectors often leading gains on positive news about potential U.S. trade agreements. Predictions of European stocks outperforming in 2025 have not materialized, and the value of the euro continues to be a key consideration. Several regions are also witnessing growing opposition to tourism, marked by public demonstrations. In the crypto space, the European market is gaining momentum, evidenced by Bitfavo's acquisition of a MiCA license and Germany's introduction of tokenized Mr. stocks. Finland is now the site of expansion for NVIDIA competitor Grok, which is establishing its first European data center in Helsinki. The expansion is financially backed by venture capital arms of Samsung and Cisco, highlighting confidence in Grok's technology and the strategic importance of the Helsinki location. South Korea is contending with economic challenges stemming from potential tariffs imposed by the United States, which has caused some market fluctuations. President Trump's letters to Seoul, threatening 25% levies starting August 1st, contributed to this volatility, while South Korea's Kospi Index and Kosdaq saw gains after the tariff deadline announcement. They had previously declined following the initial tariff announcement. South Korea is actively monitoring the situation and preparing to respond as the U.S. maintains these tariffs. To mitigate these trade pressures, South Korea plans to intensify trade negotiations with the U.S. Efforts to address the Korea discount are underway, with the Assembly passing a Commerce Bill revision, expanding the duty of boards to shareholders. In other economic developments, Mirai Asset and KB Lee, the first half IPO market. South Korea is also working to boost won trading during extended hours. A pilot cargo of Canadian crude signals growing energy cooperation. South Korea's rice production is forecast to dip slightly. Additionally, a 36-year-old beauty mogul has become South Korea's newest billionaire. A technical report suggests opportunities for Dutch dairy exporters in South Korea's milk powder market. Saudi Arabia is experiencing robust economic growth and diversification, spearheaded by the Public Investment Fund. PIF The PIF is actively investing in global assets, including a Manhattan property near Central Park, and transitioning into a post-trillion era focused on strategic investments. Saudi SAP Invest is expanding into MENA private credit. The National Development Fund secured $1.30 billion in credit to bolster domestic projects. Alimna Bank has mandated a USD benchmark 5-year sukuk issuance. The Saudi stock market is performing well, with the main index closing at 11,135 points, and the TASI rising 0.26%. Saudi banks are expected to have a strong second quarter due to increased lending. The kingdom issued over 80,000 new commercial licenses in the second quarter, indicating substantial business expansion. Saudi Arabia is also prioritizing attracting skilled workers through a new permit system. The country is becoming a major player in the $600 billion global sports market. Depository receipts are enhancing Saudi Arabia's access to international financial markets. However, Amnesty International has reported a concerning surge in executions, reaching a record high, particularly for drug-related offenses. Turkey is referenced in the context of a report titled Dividend Powerhouses in the Gulf, Unearthing Sustainable Income and Growth in Saudi Arabia and Turkey, suggesting a comparative financial analysis between the two nations. Asian markets have shown volatility, reacting to pressure from the Trump administration for accelerated trade agreements. The anticipation of a Wednesday tariff deadline initially depressed markets as investors braced for potential economic disruption. However, some Asian shares recovered ground after Trump signaled a willingness to discuss tariffs and eventually delayed the deadline. The delay was accompanied by tariff letters showing the administration's sustained intent. These market movements reflect the significant influence of US trade policies and potential tariff impositions on Asian economies. Greece is leveraging European Union funding to compensate for investment deficits, according to Yanis Stornaras, the governor of the Bank of Greece. Stornaras also warned that nations imposing tariffs will likely suffer the initial adverse effects. The euro's rising valuation may be influenced by these very international trade dynamics. Singapore is now home to Lapu Gold's first international store, marking a significant step for the Chinese jewelry company as it seeks to challenge established luxury brands on a global scale. Romania is navigating economic currents as it considers holding steady on interest rates. Tax changes are expected to have an impact on overall price levels. Meanwhile, Romanian investors are increasingly turning their attention to tech companies and cryptocurrencies as viable investment options. Turning to Oman, the nation is deepening its economic ties with Saudi Arabia through the second phase of industrial integration. In related financial news, Bank Sohar is set to provide crucial financing for various economic zone projects within Oman, bolstering its infrastructure and development. Canada's stock market saw a minor dip as the S&P TAIEX Composite Index closed down by 0.06%. Separately, Aura Minerals, a company based in Canada, is planning to list its shares on the Nasdaq Stock Exchange, targeting a valuation of approximately $2.10 billion. South Africa is currently grappling with allegations against President Cyril Ramaphosa regarding the police force. Furthermore, the nation finds itself in the crosshairs of the Trump administration, receiving trade letters alongside Malaysia and Myanmar. These letters indicate potential shifts in trade policy that could significantly impact South Africa's economic ties with the United States. Germany's DAX index soared, exceeding 24,000, propelled by surprisingly positive German industrial data. Adding to financial activity, a German pension fund committed US $50 to Chinese stocks. Meanwhile, a Swiss flight en route from Serbia to Switzerland was forced to make an emergency landing in Germany due to technical malfunction. Turning to India, textile stocks rallied following the United States' imposition of a 35% tariff on Bangladesh. Analysts predict potential growth for Indian companies if tariffs are lowered in a future trade deal. Malaysia's Trade Ministry affirmed its commitment to ongoing discussions with the United States concerning tariffs. In other financial news, Kenanga AB introduced structured warrants tied to HANG, saying indices on Bursa Malaysia. Pakistan's stock market surpassed 133,000 points, driven by increased investor interest in equities. The dollar exchange rate will play a decisive role in Poland's potential ascent to become the 20th largest global economy. In Switzerland, data reveals that 4 in 10 residents have a migrant background. Nigeria's Guarantee Trust, a prominent financial group, is pursuing a listing on the London Stock Exchange. Ghana secured a $367 million disbursement from the International Monetary Fund after a successful review. Across Europe, BCG reports growing restructuring pressures in both Italy and the Nordic countries. On the African continent, a premier African minister delivered an update regarding the Zulu lithium plant. And that's a wrap for today's news, because even headlines need a nap. Stay curious, stay kind, and let the noise fade as you find your quiet. Take care, stay awesome, and I'll see you next time on WHAM Today.